to fly thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am I not to fly like thee, or art thou not a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing.
I'm both a professor and a playwright, primarily interested in artists and thinkers like Blake and Whitehead, who show us a way out of ecocide. After all, ecocide begins by confining ourselves to optics and cutting ourselves off from haptics. For Whitehead, our fatal modern error was to repudiate speculative metaphysics. For Blake, it was to circumscribe the doors of more than human perception. Some of this is worked out in my contributions to Vela, the journal of the Blake Society. Vela 3, you can find my essay, Earth's Answer, Blake's Terran Ecology. And in Vela 5, you can find my story, Critical Mass. The point of a poem like The Fly is to jolt us into seeing the fallacy of the modern optics of finitude, or to see the fallacy of the circumscriptive self. Perhaps The Fly has proven so popular because it does what, for Blake, art does at its best, take us beyond the self. In this case, by consolidating and exposing its error. One cannot simply dance and drink and sing the self away. One must actively cognize the fallacy that imprisons us. Only then do the apparent services of the optics of finitude melt away. As I argue in my dissertation, the British Romantics practiced a radically ecological understanding of poetry and imagination. What they mean by poetry is akin to what speculative thinkers today refer to as ecopoiesis or sympoiesis. From this perspective, the inner principles of reality in poetry are indivisible. The cognizing of this indivisibility is a medicine or antidote to alienation. This involves what Blake calls self-annihilation, or the gentle dissolution of the constructed ego in interrelationship, or Terran ecology. It's been said that the Romantics were as much love poets as nature poets, but the problem with assertions of any kind is that they limit our attention. We make assumptions about love, nature, and the love of nature, and perhaps miss the vital romantic concern with the tacit modern limits set upon cognition, or what I call the modern bar on ecological modes of attention. Blake approaches this in an explicitly religious way, but Keats and Shelley drive toward the same mode of intensive attention, which we might call gnosis, or what Whitehead calls the feeling for nature as exhibiting entwined prehensive unities, each suffused with modal presences of others. When this drive toward intensive relational modes of experience is blocked by tacit modern epistemic regimes, privileging the optic and disqualifying the haptic, we find ourselves in crisis. Blake and Shelley explicitly connect epistemic violence with the commodification of art. We might say that Blake and his contemporaries foresaw our climate emergency, or our times of collapse. The Fly works with other songs of experience not only to prompt us to ask these questions about the problem of modern optics, but to give us sudden glimpses of the haptic. A more familiar term for the haptic in ecophilosophy is Zoe, which lines up nicely with Blake's Zoas. Zoe, life without a subject, self, or center, is fascinating because we tend to see it in a double way, both optically and haptically. From an optic, kind of egoistic point of view, Zoe appears as the thread of bare life, what lies outside the city walls. From a haptic view, Zoe appears as natural sweetness. I'm particularly excited to talk about Esperanza Spalding's musical setting of The Fly, the first song on her 2010 album, Chamber Music Society, which was released when she was 25, a year before she won a Grammy for Best New Artist. After which she released only one video from the album, her rendition of The Fly, which she also chose for the opening song on her NPR Tiny Desk concert set. I think it would have William Blake shouting with joy, for many reasons, including the fact that it's the work of a political, young black woman and jazz genius from America. I can imagine no more perfect voice for Blake today. By the end of this talk, I'll try to show how jazz for Spalding is a haptic practice that drives beyond experience to experience without an experiencer. Great jazz crosses from the aesthetic to the spiritual without requiring us to carry religion on our backs. Spalding stumbled across The Fly in a bookstore and seems to have felt a kinship with what Blake was doing. There's not so much comprehension as what Whitehead calls prehension, inheritance, transmission. Deeper than the technical proficiency runs an open, relaxed, feeling, humorous mind. Alive to the pure creativity or improvisation that Whitehead considered the ultimate nature of reality, and that Deleuze called a life. Musicians seem to intuit that The Fly draws us into an encounter with life, which we can also call Zoe or the biosphere. In a recent concert, Spalding commented that all the diligent practice is really about that moment of communication or sharing the space beyond the self. So, of course, this is the engraved plate, The Fly, and we can see here kind of matron caring for two young children, one of them a little toddler who needs a little help walking, learning to walk, and a little girl quite independently playing with shuttlecock. It very much looks like it belongs in the Songs of Innocence. Let me see a little bit closer here. Beautifully painted. We can look at the Blake archive to see many versions of it. Let's see here. So if we go to objects from the same matrix, we can see that there are looks like at least 14 different versions in different collections, all painted slightly differently. What does this seemingly minor poem from Songs of Experience, 1794, sandwiched between the sick rose and the angel, have to do with ecophilosophy, decolonization, deterritorialization, irony, and jazz? Why does The Fly continue to buzz, hum, resonate with musicians like Spalding or folktronica composer Cosmo Sheldrake? We heard a little bit of his rendition of The Fly at the opening. What is the relationship between poetry, music, and ecological medicine? Keats put it in a letter to his brothers. This pursued through volumes would perhaps take us no further than this, that with a great poet, the sense of beauty overcomes every other consideration, or rather obliterates all consideration. For Blake, similarly, art is always revolutionary. Original artists do more than challenge perceptual regimes. They offer what we might call cognitive medicine for modern doubt, the elixir of countercognition. Poesis as countercognition emerges as the core image of Keats and Shelley's dream vision poems, in which I've taken great interest, which take us into a dream within a dream within a dream. At the inmost level of the dream, some form of the divine feminine, such as Shelley's Shape All Light, invites the poet-dreamer to drink from a cup. And to do so is to enter into the more than human, creative, inner principle of reality. Blake and Shelley seem to agree on the extraordinary necessity of poetry, not because it's art, but because it's a vital medicine for the materialist age we live in. It can cure the doubt that persuades us that we're not infinitely interrelated and infinitely responsible. Without this optic curb upon the haptic, the mind naturally drives towards ecological modes of attention. As Blake writes, less than all cannot satisfy man. But there is such a thing as bad art. Art and its techniques can be an adornment to privilege. Indeed, Blake risked everything, refusing to commercialize, emphatic that conventional artists engage in a pretense of art to destroy art. Normative aesthetics, bad art, and bad science, as Blake calls them, publishes doubt, cutting us off from the source of our resilience, the ecological medicine we need. As Blake wrote, if the sun and moon should doubt, they'd immediately go out. In The Fly, we see a speaker whose logic slips because they're literally unable to think things through. Blake had perhaps already worked out the mythopoesis set down a few years later in The Four Zoas, the reversible fall into disintegration of the primal emanations of the psyche. Your reason. But at a more simple level, Blake really loves to contrast, or I love the contrast he gives between abstract philosophy and imagination. I guess this interests me particularly because I engaged in both, I guess. In the deeps of Entuthun Benithun, which for Foster Damon, that it's the doubt or obscurity created by rationality, one finds abstract philosophy warring in enmity against imagination, which is the divine body of the Lord Jesus, blessed forever Jerusalem. Let's read the poem, and bearing that in mind, that kind of war that goes on in the mind between abstraction and utter relationship, doubt and absolute inspiration. Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am not I a fly like thee? Or art not thou a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die. Maria Popova writes in her often wonderful, I guess it's a blog, The Marginalian, is it any wonder that the man who saw the universe in a grain of sand should see the improbable beauty and tragedy of human existence in the ephemeral life of a fly? I think there is no wrong reading of this poem. I really don't think there is. So every reading is valid. But I think this does perhaps miss the difference between the speaker of the poem and Blake himself. There's no doubt Blake would see an infinite world in a fly, but I think we have to look at the poem a little more carefully. So there are some aesthetic and eco-philosophical readings that have been perhaps, I think, more interesting. Harold Bloom's, of course, famously, he discusses the fly as an emblem poem, an aesthetic object that challenges normative cognition through a tension between symbol, image, and word. This kind of suggests that Blake is doing something very strange, indeed. And Morton picks up on this. I'll be looking at his reading of The Tiger and the Fly. Reading The Tiger in his recent book, Hell, he notes that the engraving of the willfully misspelled tiger looks like a plushy toy. He finds something wrathful and paradoxical in the poem's undecidability. The poem itself is a living creature, as if to say, I am the tiger. Don't frame my symmetry, baby. Morton reads the tiger much the way he reads the fly, in terms of a split between person and machine. Whitehead similarly famously argued that Tennyson, in contrast to the Romantics, exhibits this impossible, fatal contradiction in the modern mind, the split between belief in mechanism and belief in value, like holding those two together and completely contradictory. Much of Morton's recent book about Blake and the climate emergency, Hell, is concerned with undoing this kind of polarization through wrath. So what wrath is, I would say, haptic, ecological intensivity that deterritorializes perception and attention, melting away apparent services and displaying the infinite which was hid. For Morton, as for Whiteheadians like Isabel Stengers, this is about ethics, and ethics is about being a body, or what Blake calls sensual enjoyment. Being a body is haptic, it's interrelational. Ethics is not other than felt interrelation. The limitation in interrelation is convenient limitation in ethics. So in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, fire doesn't raise the world, but it dissolves the perception of the world as finite and corrupt. It opens us up to this infinite ethics. This is what Morton says. That's the chemical composition of these tigers. Wrath is not destructive anger that's acted out in the master-slave duality like we see happening in the world. Wrath is wise because it creates in the form of acknowledgement. I think that is a beautiful summary of what's going on, especially in The Fly for me. It's a dramatization that allows us to glimpse something. Here he's talking about slavery, seeing slavery for what it is, really seeing it, not slavishly and not masterfully, would be seeing with the burning eyes of the tiger and the distant deeper skies of the imagination. Which kind of brings us to Deleuze. There's a connection between this notion of wrath and his notion of deterritorialization, and his notion, we see this also in Bloom, the logic of sensation, which operates upon us in non-representational, non-linear ways. Deleuze was, of course, deeply influenced by Bergson and his notion of the lived duration, his rejection of spatial representation. And he wrote a book, of course, on Bacon, on Francis Bacon, who, funnily enough, Bacon felt one of his most successful paintings was of a bust of Blake, which he went to see in the National Portrait Gallery in London. The painting was done in 1955, and it was commissioned by composer Gerard Sherman as an album cover for 6 Songs of William Blake, which has a rendition of The Fly on it. This is a pretty famous Bacon work. It just shows the constant interaction with music that Blake is having. Morton's discussion of the tiger as a work of wrath, a living creature, what Blake might call a zoa, adds to the work of Deleuze intoxicated Blake scholars like Marc Lassier and Claire Colbrook, who note the tension Blake introduces between optics and haptics, eye and hand, representation and sensation. Morton comments, conceptual rigidity is the enemy. Ambiguity is how to defeat it. The tiger hinges around the ambiguous border between person, wise, machine, idiot. There's no way to decide whether the singer and the tiger are either of these. He writes, I can never be sure that I'm done with it. That damn tiger is still burning bright somewhere. It's as if Blake had created life. And I feel like this is true of many of the poems and songs of experience. Morton's reading of The Fly, of course, owes much to Bloom's earlier reading. In 1987, Bloom writes, The Fly is a less ferocious emblem poem than The Sick Rose, but it also turns on unexpected ironies. It may be that Blake is recalling King Lear and the frightening reflection that the gods kill us for their sport, even as wanton boys kill flies. The want of thought is death. The thoughtless hand is therefore murderous. If no bodaddy is the deity, then we are at best happy flies, because deluded ones, whether we live or die. So I'm going to discuss Morton's reading in Hell in 2024, but first I'd like to discuss my 2018 dissertation, my reading in there, which is that The Fly is very much a poem about a nightmare of spectrality through which we can glimpse extraordinary joy. The speaker commits a strange miscognition because he's imprisoned in an optics of finitude that compels him to conceive death, or the relaxation of the center, in terms of oblivion rather than infinity. The Fly is unique in the economy with which it hilariously exposes the extent to which the modern subject misinterprets the experience of the ecological event as the threat of a radical alterity. The Fly presents us with the absurd implications of the optics of finitude. Cut off from infinite sympathies by his epistemic stance, The Fly's empiricist speaker cannot help but reduce himself to the humming chaos of non-life or of inert matter. Having negligently killed a fly, he thinks through the moral and existential implications of his murderous act. He finds happily that there are none. Lockean subject in a mechanistic deistic universe, he quickly realizes that all life is on the same level of brute bare life. He is a fly, a blind mechanism determined in its movements by sensations of pain and pleasure. I mean, it may help to note that Zoe, if we're talking about Zoe, it looks like bare life from the point of the legal citizen who they themselves also have Zoe, but because it's at the core of a legal citizen, it's natural sweetness. It's the thing that the state exists to protect. But when it's not at the core of a self, a person, someone with property, someone with a legal right, then it's something we can destroy, which we see this happening over and over in the world around us, and it's frankly terrifying. So our default modern optics confines Zoe as sweetness or sacredness to the sentimental interiority of the rational, legal, private citizen, what Agamben after Foucault calls bios. Cordoned off as paradise, a walled garden, Zoe is converted into private property, the educated, cultured core that the nation-state protects. The sweet privilege at the legal citizen's core is the corollary of the violence deployed as both war and exploitation, defense and trade on the thread of life outside the walls. All of this stems from modern doubt about and fear of the nature of sense experience. That doubt is also a curfew, a curtailment. I think when he talks about circumcision, he means cutting the circumference, cutting what circumscribes us, cutting it away. So Shelley and Whitehead have similar things to say about this, the act of defacing, right? While the skeptic destroys gross superstitions, let him spare to deface the eternal truths charactered upon the imaginations of men. And when we read Whitehead, it becomes a bit more clear what's being implied. The basis of democracy is the common fact of value experience as constituting the essential nature of each pulsation of actuality. Everything has some value for itself, for others, and for the whole. This characterizes the meaning of actuality. By reason of this character constituting reality, the conception of morals arises. We have no right to deface the value experience, which is the very essence of the universe. Existence in its own nature is the upholding of value intensity. Also, no unit can separate itself from the others and from the whole. But as moderns, we do deface the universe. We do ecological violence when we limit ourselves to the epistemological and limit awareness to thought, a serial and material buzz blotted out at death. We die, and the buzzing eye stops. Ecocide follows from valuing the inner nature of the self-interested, rational citizen who looks and talks like me. What kind of sacredness at our private core gives us the right to commit violence against what's outside us and not sacred? What's really at stake is a narrowing of our sympathies, of our felt and ethical interrelations, a contraction, an excision of ethics, violence. If we wish to feel ethics, which is to feel alive, we have to make extraordinary efforts to melt the ratio. Words like joy, wisdom, love don't help because words become fake ideals. Knowledge is useless here. Knowledge is always external and frozen. The only thing that matters is cognition or gnosis. Knowledge does not transform the knower, but gnosis is a change in the very constitution of knowing. That's why I called the haptic a mode of cognition or cognitive medicine. In that sense, the fly is one more troubling figure for the discursive eye, a specter, a negation, a covering cherub, or opacity, Satan that limits vision to inert matter. These are all Blake's terms. The world of mechanism is conceived as a nested series of blind hands, blind and violent nature, random forces that obliterate other random forces. The man actually becomes a fly till some blind hand shall brush my wing. As an aside, I mean, one thing I like about Morton's Hell recent book is he totally rejects this dominant image we have today of the revenge of nature, the revenge of Gaia, which I really like that. We have the metaphor, I am a fly. It's a disturbing one. The central question becomes the slippage between I and fly. Are we both just buzzing matter? Is thought or I a mere epiphenomenon? I won't go into cosmic sheldricks. setting of this song. But it's interesting that he's the son of Rupert Sheldrake, who's challenged the scientific establishment, particularly in England, with theories of non-local mind and morphic fields, in conversation with Blake-influenced people and Whitehead-influenced people like David Bohm. In the 1995 episode of the British TV series The South Bank Show, Sheldrake discussed how, in Blake's monotype or large color print, Newton is like an angel turning his mind toward what I call the optics of finitude. Though the more than human world is all around him, in fact, he's part of it. So in Cosmo's version of The Fly, we get this happy feeling that the death of the center is life. There seem to be two salient yet irreconcilable ways to read The Fly. In the first case, we're in a happy position. Nothing divides the human and non-human. Thought is a manifestation of Zoe, not as bare life, as seen by the paranoid, propertied citizen, but as natural sweetness. In the second case, the speaker refers to thought only in the most contracted 18th century sense. So the equation of life with thought is rather nasty. A person is a natural organ subject to sense. In There Is No Natural Religion, Blake periodically dismantles this reductive syllogistic logic. And this is where all of Blake's work started, with this attempt, which I think his whole mythopoesis grew out of it. In plate A, he presents the dominant epistemology. A3, man has no notion of moral fitness, but from education. Naturally, he's only a natural organ subject to sense. A9, the desires and perceptions of man, untaught by anything but organs of sense, must be limited to objects of sense. And he replies to that in part B. Man's perceptions are not bounded by organs of perception. He perceives more than sense, though ever so acute, can discover. And B6, the bounded is loathed by its possessor, the same dull round, even if a universe would soon become a mill with complicated wheels. I'm a happy fly, minding my own business, dancing, drinking, singing, oblivious to the fact that my existence might have other ramifications. I'm bare, brute life. We're at best thinking machines, and we're going to be blotted out soon enough. So we may as well be noisy little beings in an existence that is nasty, brutish, and short. It's all I. Then am I a happy fly if I live or if I die. Dancing, drinking, singing imply a kind of mindless intoxication, the common man in the pub. This is not inspiration, but the gross intoxication of a noisome little I that fears death. In the order of magnitudes, the blind hand that will nullify the man's limited consciousness is simply another thoughtless hand writ larger. All there is in this man's vision is the nugatory buzz of bare life, from the microscopic to the macroscopic levels, like an endless violent series of nested dolls. So now we can look at Morton's reading from Hell. He links the speaker's implied deism to violent colonialism. The fly's getting at the blind, laundry-folding hands of logic, reducing personhood to mechanism. As flies are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. Lemons Gloucester in King Lear. He sounds like someone realizing that they picked the wrong leader. It's the same at the beginning of Descartes' Meditations. I'm sitting here by the fire. There I am. It's an accident. If I live or if I die, it doesn't really matter. According to the logic of the fly, I'm just a machine like the non-living part of the universe, a mill with complicated wheels. Life is a lie. Life and beliefs in the personhood of things such as flies are demonized as the colonial Christian war against animism. Morton's comment about animism points back to the question of Zoe and reminds me of Isabel Stenger's reflections on how when we split fact and value, we also split modernity from what could otherwise be civilization, or as it were, London from Jerusalem. As moderns, how do we understand Zoe? Life without center or self. So I'd like to try to pull all the strings together, how Blake presents abstract philosophy warring with imagination. It's similar to the way Whitehead speaks of two modes of cognition: the gross, which produces identity, consciousness, sense experience, and the subtle, interrelational, more than human, which has not so much to do with cognition as prehension, which is more. And the point is that our modern epistemic regimes, including our walled institutions of higher learning, are always tacitly barring or disqualifying ecological modes of attention. It's very hard to use academic language here. Optics keeps recentering itself. And so as we'll see, we're getting to the music. Esperanza Spalding says, all legacies end here. You get to just keep getting there, getting there. There's no promise or test here. You get to just keep on getting there, getting there. No virgins or saints here. You get to just keep on getting there, getting there. All aliens and legals cross in even here. They come to just keep on getting there. Statesmen lost in their borders. So the key to the fly is this question of spectrality, especially when we get this slippery if-then logic. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die? Is thought spectral, hypothetical, composed of if-then statements, premises that lead to conclusions down slippery slopes of reductionism that calls itself necessity? So Blake really drives this home in Jerusalem. How we're born a specter. We inhabit that spectrality. Man is born a specter and is altogether an evil and requires a new selfhood continually and must continually be changed into his direct contrary. The optic has to be changed into the haptic. But your Greek philosophy teaches that man is righteous and is vegetated specter. If this optics is falsehood, a mode of sin, that's also intimately involved in our normal sense of I, then no wonder Blake emphasizes friendship as a cure for selfhood and insists that friendship means continual forgiveness of sins. Rousseau thought men good by nature. He found them evil and found no friend. Friendship cannot exist without forgiveness of sins continually. And likewise, he says, for art and science can't exist, but in minutely organized particulars. He's talking about the haptic, and not in generalized demonstrations of the rational power. Establishment of truth depends on destruction of falsehood continually. So haptics, imagination, actively cognizes infinite interrelations as its own more than human nature. It loves, as Blake writes, if a thing loves, it is infinite. Love or friendship is continual forgiveness, not of others, but of our shared tendency to sin in the sense of spectral or contracted perception, abstracting, isolating, miscognizing, which is what the narrative of Fly is doing. Forgiveness is a form of love or wrath, melting away apparent surfaces so that the haptic reveals itself. Creation or error is burnt up in the act of haptic attention. The last judgment, Blake writes, is an overwhelming of bad art and science. Error or creation will be burned up, and then, and not till then, truth or eternity will appear. It is burnt up the moment men cease to behold it. So let's turn to a musician who takes up the fly to burn up error or to let the haptic speak. And I'm delighted by the little story she tells in an interview with NPR about how she came upon the poem. I remember being in Portland and picking this book. The painting on the cover of the book struck me. I had no idea what it was. I just saw the painting, Spalding says. And the first page I turned to was this poem. In the store, I read the poem about 10 times. It's just an incredibly powerful, simple little poem. I bought the book and put that poem above my desk. It's been in front of my face for 8 or 9 years. 2 years ago, practicing this melody, I thought, I definitely wanted to put lyrics to this. And I realized that it fit the poem to a T. Somehow my subconscious really wanted to sing this to the people. She blends jazz, R&B, Brazilian vocalese, classical music, understated funk, and often with lyrics that very much deal with the climate emergency, ecology, blending, this beautiful mix of fatalism and hope. Her concern with the climate emergency is evident in her newly released Milton and Esperanza that just came out, I think, a couple months ago, with tracks like a jazz version of Michael Jackson's Earth Song featuring Milton Nascimento and Diane Reeves.
Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away, and not I fly like thee, art thou man like me? Little fly, for I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the one of thought is death, little fly, little fly. Then am I a happy if I live or if I
Particularly entranced by the way the bass imitates not exactly the sound, but the feeling of a fly's movements, erratic yet expressive of a mood, giving the fly a voice as another dramatic speaker, as if she's letting the haptic speak. What comes across as a kind of meditation on art, as a disciplined yet effortless communion with what lies beyond form, beyond emotion, beyond the self. And there's a kind of resistance, a not ceasing from mental fight, a speaking back from earth as interrelationship to abstract heaven, unlocking, as Blake does in Earth's Answer, what Donna Haraway might call the Terran concerns, frozen by the astral gods. To tarry with the haptic is to ceaselessly remake an effort that's its own reward, de-reifying the reified, melting optics into haptics, as Spalding puts it in Earth to Heaven, a Joni Mitchell-esque track from her 2016 album Emily's Devolution. There are no perfect amends here. You get to just keep on getting there. There's no promise or test here. You get to just keep on getting there. And we can see from these lyrics, it starts out with lines from The Fly. Again, she's still thinking about it. Thought and strength and breath. Ain't much else left. Earth to Heaven. It has, for me, it has a lot of parallels with Earth's Answer in the Songs of Experience. But it starts continuing to think about, years later, that line from The Fly, thought and strength and breath. And here we see a really sophisticated understanding of it. there's not a direct parallel, but I see a lot of the structure and themes of Blake's London, one of my favorite poems. All legacies end here. You get to just keep getting there. No promise or test here. You get to just keep getting there.
There are no perfect amends here. You get to just keep on getting there. There's no promise or test here.